The second beacon was not supposed to be there. Sina Vale had been awake for 6 hours when it appeared on her locator panel, a pale amber pulse, faint and intermittent, originating from somewhere 4 kilometers to the northeast, out on the open shelf. She had been sitting with her back against the insulated wall of the survey shelter, working through her inventory in the methodical way her mother had taught her: heat packs remaining, water ration status, structural integrity of the shell, power cell charge on the distress transmitter she had already activated 18 hours ago. The inventory was a way of staying calm. She had been calm. The second beacon complicated that. She had come to Keth-Vora Shelf as part of a 2-person geological survey run herself, and a Vorasi equipment tech named Keth-Vora, who had gone back to the transit lander to retrieve the second core drill when the shelf ice shifted and swallowed the lander whole. The ice had given no warning. It simply opened, and the lander dropped 20 meters into a subsurface cavity, and that was the end of the lander and the end of Keth-Vora and the end of everything that had felt stable about the day. Sina had been 300 meters away at the time, crouched over a sample core, and she had watched it happen without being able to do anything. And then she had walked back to the portable survey shelter and done her inventory. The shelter was rated for 72 hours in Keth-Vora conditions. She had been in it for 18. The temperature outside was negative 58 degrees Celsius by the shelf's ambient standard, which did not account for the wind. The shelf ran a constant surface gust of 40 to 60 kilometers an hour off the polar basin, which drove the effective cold lower still. The locator panel pulsed again. The signal was weak, which meant either the transmitter at the source was damaged or the person operating it was not applying full pressure to the activation plate, or both. She looked at the signal for a long moment, then she looked at the door of the shelter. Keth-Vora Shelf was not a populated zone. There were no other survey teams on this rotation. She knew that from the mission brief. The only personnel listed in the sector were herself and Keth-Vora, which meant whoever was broadcasting that beacon had not been on the official registry. A parallel contract, a competitor survey, a transit vehicle that had come down in the same shelf system without anyone filing the right crossing permit. It happened on resource-contested death worlds. She did not know who was out there. She had no obligation to them. 4 kilometers, negative 58, 40 kilometers per hour of wind gusting to 60. She began pulling on her outer thermal layer. The rational argument against going was straightforward, and she did not ignore it. Her shelter had heat reserves for approximately 50 more hours at current draw. Going out would cost her time and body temperature and potentially structural damage to the shelter if she left it unlatched in high wind. The rescue window was 48 to 72 hours out. The distress transmitter she had activated was a Class 3 rated unit, reliable to a range of 11 light minutes, and the nearest Galactic Survey Authority relay station was 9 light minutes away. Someone would come. If she stayed in the shelter, she would be alive when they did. If the person 4 kilometers out on the shelf was still alive, they might not make it to rescue. She sealed her thermal layer, buckled the outer windshell over it, and pulled the face mask over her nose and mouth. She checked the portable heat cell she was carrying, a single emergency unit, rated for 4 hours of body temp maintenance in Class 4 cold environments. Keth-Vora qualified as Class 5. That meant the cell would run approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes before it began to fail. She would need to move at pace. She picked up the locator panel, memorized the bearing to the beacon, and pushed open the shelter door. The cold hit like a wall. There was a particular quality to Keth-Vora's surface wind that distinguished it from cold wind in milder environments. It did not gust so much as press, a continuous lateral force that required constant muscle correction to walk against. Within the first 100 meters, Sina had established a rhythm. Lean into the wind, step, correct, step, keep the bearing. Her face mask covered most of her face but not her eyes, and her eyes were already aching from the cold, the tears freezing in the corners before they could track down her cheeks. She thought about the signal, intermittent pressure on the activation plate that was consistent with someone injured and losing coordination, or someone alternating between consciousness and not. The signal had been running for a while before she had noticed it, which meant they had been out there a while. She moved faster. The shelf was not flat. It ran in low ridges and shallow hollows, wind-carved depressions where drifted ice had mounded and refrozen into shapes that were oddly beautiful at any temperature above freezing and simply treacherous at -58. She crossed 3 such hollows in the first 2 kilometers, reading the wind shadow behind each ridge before stepping into it, keeping her weight low when the ice surface changed pitch. She had grown up on a high-altitude research station on a world that tried to kill you in weather. She knew how to read terrain. The heat cell was drawing at 30% above rated capacity in the ambient cold. She felt it. At the 2-kilometer mark, she checked her locator panel. The beacon was ahead and slightly left. She adjusted bearing and pushed on. The wind gusted to the higher end of its range and she braced against it, head down, until it dropped. When she looked up again, she saw a shape in a hollow 40 meters ahead, half buried in a drift. A survival pod, small, standard Galactic Survey Authority issue, door blown partway open and jammed against a shelf ice ridge. She reached it in 90 seconds. Inside was a Keth-Vora surveyor, 4-limbed, covered in pale gray scaled hide, young by the look of the face, which was the same hollow-eyed look that translated across most species when someone had been cold and frightened for too long. The surveyor was conscious, barely, pressed against the far wall of the pod with a portable heater that had evidently died hours ago. The interior of the pod was frigid, not as cold as the open shelf but close. The activation plate of the beacon was pressed under one of the surveyor's hands in a grip that looked like it had been locked there for a long time. The Keth-Vora's eyes opened when Sina came through the door. There was a moment, she had had this moment before in other emergencies, where the other person tried to read her face to determine whether to panic further or begin to calm down. She had learned to make her face easy to read in those moments. Not false reassurance, just steadiness, the equation already solved. She crouched down and attached the portable heat cell to the wall coupling. It began cycling immediately. The Keth-Vora made a sound, probably language, one she did not speak. She held up 4 fingers, then pointed at the door, then made a walking motion with 2 fingers across her palm. 4 kilometers. We walk. The universal language of someone who has done a lot of field work with people who do not share a vocabulary. The Keth-Vora looked at the door, at the cold beyond it, at Sina. Sina waited. The Keth-Vora pushed to their feet. The return crossing was worse. The heat cell was now operating at full load rather than body maintenance only, because the Keth-Vora's core temperature was low enough that Sina had strapped the unit between them with the spare tether cord from the pod, distributing warmth to both. It would not last 4 kilometers at that draw rate. She did the math on the move and did not like the answer, and then continued moving. The Keth-Vora was upright but not moving well. Their gait was unsteady, the cold having done something to the coordination of their lower limbs that Sina could not diagnose and did not need to. It meant she was taking partial weight. She moved to the surveyor's left side and got her right arm around their midsection, which was approximately at her shoulder height, because Keth-Vora tended to stand half a meter taller than most humans. She adjusted her center of gravity and kept walking. Wind gusted to 60. She did not stop. The cold came in through the gaps in her windshell that hadn't mattered on the outward journey, the extra weight, the slower pace, the heat cell running hot against her ribs making the surrounding cold feel worse by contrast. Her left hand, the one she was using for her locator panel, lost fine sensation somewhere in the 3rd kilometer. She transferred the panel to her right hand and used her left as a brace against the Keth-Vora's back, which was warmer than the air. The Keth-Vora made sounds periodically that she categorized, without any language to verify it, as either pain or encouragement. She chose encouragement. Shelter was visible at the 200-meter mark, a pale geometric shape in the drift, exactly where she had left it, door latched correctly. The Keth-Vora saw it at the same moment she did, and the surveyor's pace improved, which told her the hypothermia had not progressed to the stage where landmarks stopped meaning anything. She got the door open with her right hand, got the Keth-Vora through it, got herself through it, and pulled it shut. The heat of the shelter hit her like a second wall, the inverse of the one she had walked into 4 hours ago. She stood for a moment with her back against the door, and felt her face begin to ache as the circulation returned. The Keth-Vora sat down on the floor and looked at her. She sat down across from them. She reached into the supply pack and found the emergency rations, 2 sealed bars, standard issue, the kind that tasted like nothing but contained everything, and held one out. The Keth-Vora took it. They ate in silence. Rescue came 31 hours later. A Galactic Survey Authority recovery vessel, crewed, dropping through the cloud layer at dawn. The pilot had been tracking 2 distress signals for the last 20 hours and had routed through the standard medical assessment protocol before the vessel had even touched down. The Keth-Vora surveyor was evacuated first, assessed as mild to moderate hypothermia with peripheral nerve stress in the lower limbs, expected recovery in 4 to 6 days. Sina was assessed second. The Keth-Vora medic, a young officer named Keth-Vora who had been running Keth sector recovery runs for 3 seasons, worked through the standard checklist with the practice speed of someone who had done it 400 times. Core temperature, low normal, recovering. Fingers, frostbite indicators on the left hand, 2nd degree, 2 digits. Wind exposure, consistent with 6 to 8 hours unshielded surface time. Keth-Vora paused at that line. He looked at the shelter. He looked at the Keth-Vora being helped onto the recovery vessel by his second officer. He looked at Sina. The Keth-Vora surveyor, he said, in careful common trade, was 4 kilometers from this position. Yes, Sina said. He wrote something on the incident tablet. She could not read Keth-Vora script. She did not ask what he had written. On the recovery vessel, warming her hands on a cup of standard-issue pressed-leaf tea that tasted better than anything she could remember, Sina heard the Keth-Vora across the aisle speaking rapidly into a communication unit, recovered enough to be animated now, the flat affect of the cold replaced by something that sounded in its rhythms like urgency, like someone explaining a thing that they needed the person on the other end to understand. She did not speak Keth-Vora. She did not need to. She drank her tea. Keth-Vora's incident report, filed 18 hours later through the standard GSA recovery channel, included a notation in the final field, reason for delayed evacuation of Surveyor Vale. 1 count secondary hypothermia exposure and 2-digit frostbite on the left hand. Voluntary, rescued a second stranded crew member at personal risk. Member was not known to Surveyor Vale and was not under her operational responsibility. Method, foot crossing, open shelf, 4 kilometers each direction. Duration, approximately 7 hours in Class 5 conditions. The next field was labeled Assessment. Keth-Vora had typed 3 words. No further explanation.